The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Ravencrest Palace as Princess Elena's black sedan approached the grand entrance. She adjusted her navy blazer and checked her watch one final time. The monthly family council meeting was scheduled to begin in 20 minutes, and, despite the early hour, she felt energized. Today's agenda included discussions about the kingdom's new agricultural initiatives, something Elena had championed for months. Elena had always been known as the hard-working royal. While her younger brother Prince Marcus preferred ribbon cuttings and charity galas, Elena rolled up her sleeve for the unglamorous but essential work of governance. She understood crop rotations, water management systems, and rural economics better than most government ministers. The farmers loved her because she listened to their concerns and actually implemented solutions. As the sedan pulled to a stop, Elena noticed something unusual. The normal contingent of palace guards was missing from their posts. Instead, two unfamiliar security officers stood at attention by the ornate double doors. Their uniforms were crisp and their posture perfect, but Elena didn't recognize either face. After 15 years of attending these meetings, she knew every guard, every staff member, every protocol officer who worked the morning shift. Elena's personal protection officer, Captain Rodriguez, stepped out first and opened her door. "Your Royal Highness, shall I escort you inside?" "Of course, Captain, though I noticed some new faces today." Rodriguez nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "There have been some staffing changes since the Queen's recent appointments, ma'am." The Queen. Even 6 months after her father's remarriage, Elena still stumbled over the title when applied to Queen Isabella. Her stepmother had moved quickly to establish her authority in the palace, implementing new protocols and replacing longtime staff with her own chosen personnel. Elena tried to be understanding. Isabella was younger than Elena herself, thrust into a complex royal hierarchy, and probably felt the need to assert her position. But the changes created an undercurrent of tension that everyone pretended not to notice. As they approached the entrance, one of the new guards stepped forward. His nameplate read, Lieutenant Morrison. "Your Royal Highness," he said with a respectful bow. "I'm afraid I need to inform you that this morning's meeting has been postponed." Elena blinked in surprise. "Postponed? I received no notification. When is it rescheduled for?" "I don't have that information, ma'am. I was simply instructed to inform you of the postponement should you arrive." Something felt wrong. Elena pulled out her phone and quickly checked her messages. Nothing from the palace secretary, nothing from her father's office, nothing from the council coordinator. Her calendar still showed the meeting as scheduled. "Lieutenant, who gave you these instructions?" The guard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Queen Isabella's office, Your Royal Highness." Captain Rodriguez stepped closer to Elena. She could sense his protective instincts activating, though his expression remained professional. "I see," Elena said carefully. "And my father, King Leopold? Was he informed of this postponement?" "I believe His Majesty is traveling today, ma'am. Perhaps that's why the meeting was postponed." Elena knew this was false. Her father never traveled on council meeting days without informing the family weeks in advance. Something was definitely wrong, but confronting the guards would accomplish nothing. They were following orders, not making policy decisions. "Very well, Lieutenant. Thank you for informing me." As they walked back to the sedan, Elena's mind raced. This felt deliberate, calculated. Someone wanted her away from today's meeting, but why? The agricultural initiatives were hardly controversial. If anything, they were popular both within the royal family and among the public. Captain Rodriguez held the car, door open. "Your Royal Highness, would you like me to make some inquiries?" "Discreetly, Captain. Something isn't right here." As they drove away from Ravencrest Palace, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Marcus. "Where are you?" "Dad's asking why you missed the meeting." Elena stared at the message in disbelief. The meeting hadn't been postponed at all. She had been deliberately blocked from attending, and her father didn't even know about it yet. Her fingers trembled slightly as she typed back. "I was told the meeting was postponed. Someone at the palace lied to me." Marcus's response came quickly. "What? That's impossible. We're about to start the agricultural discussion you prepared. Elena closed her eyes and leaned back against the leather seat. This wasn't just a misunderstanding or a scheduling error. This was a deliberate exclusion orchestrated by someone with enough authority to post guards and change protocols. Given that the orders had come from Queen Isabella's office, the source seemed obvious. But why would Isabella want to exclude her from a routine council meeting? Elena had never opposed her stepmother publicly, had always been respectful and appropriate in their interactions. She had even defended Isabella when court gossips whispered about the age difference between her and King Leopold. "Captain, take me to the Heritage Library. I need to think and I need to research something." The Heritage Library was Elena's refuge, a vast collection of historical documents, legal texts, and governmental records housed in a building adjacent to the main palace. Elena had spent countless hours there as a teenager, and it remained her favorite place for serious thinking. As they drove through the capital city's morning traffic, Elena's phone rang. Her father's name appeared on the screen. "Elena, where are you? Marcus says you were told the meeting was postponed, but I never authorized any postponement." "I know, father. I was turned away at the palace entrance by guards who claimed to have orders from Queen Isabella's office." A long pause followed. Elena could hear voices in the background, the familiar sounds of the council chamber. "That's..." King Leopold's voice was tight with controlled anger. "That's completely unacceptable. I'm going to get to the bottom of this immediately. Father, please don't make a scene. Not during the meeting. We can discuss this privately later. Elena, you've prepared extensively for today's agricultural presentation. This is your expertise, your project. Someone deliberately sabotaged your participation, and I want to know why." Elena appreciated her father's support, but she also understood palace politics well enough to know that a public confrontation would only make things worse. "I'll be at the Heritage Library if you need me. After the meeting, perhaps we can talk privately." Another pause. "I'm going to postpone your presentation until next week, when you can be here to present it properly." "This is unacceptable, Elena. Completely unacceptable." After hanging up, Elena stared out the window at the familiar streets of the capital. Citizens went about their morning routines, unaware of the drama unfolding within the royal family. Street vendors set up their stalls, office workers hurried toward their buildings, children walked to school with their parents. This was what Elena fought for in her royal duties. These people, their livelihoods, their futures. The agricultural initiatives she had developed would improve food security, create jobs in rural areas, and strengthen the kingdom's economy. Politics and palace intrigue were distractions from the real work of governance. But as they pulled up to the Heritage Library, Elena realized she could no longer ignore the political realities. Someone had made a power play against her today, and she needed to understand why. More importantly, she needed to figure out how to respond without damaging the monarchy or her relationship with her father. The library's ancient stone steps welcomed her like an old friend. Inside, surrounded by centuries of royal history and legal precedent, Elena would research everything she could about royal protocol, stepmother relationships, and succession politics. She had always preferred substance over drama, competence over controversy. But today's events suggested that someone else had chosen to make this political. Elena would need to decide whether to fight back, and if so, how to do it without compromising her principles or her effectiveness as a working royal. The morning sun continued to climb higher as Elena disappeared into the library's quiet halls, carrying with her the first pieces of what would become a much larger and more complex puzzle. Queen Isabella stood in her private office, watching through the window as Princess Elena's sedan disappeared beyond the palace gates. Her heart raced, but her expression remained composed. She had taken a significant risk today, and there would be consequences. The question was whether those consequences would be manageable or catastrophic. Isabella turned away from the window and walked to her desk, where a thick folder marked "Confidential" lay open. Inside were documents that had arrived just 2 days ago from the Ministry of Agriculture, documents that changed everything Elena thought she knew about her precious agricultural initiative. The irony was almost painful. Elena's project, the one she had worked on for months with such dedication and expertise, was about to become a public relations disaster. The preliminary environmental impact studies had revealed serious concerns about water table contamination, and the economic projections were far more optimistic than the actual data supported. Worse, 3 of the pilot programs had already shown signs of failure in neighboring kingdoms that had implemented similar policies. Isabella had discovered these problems purely by accident. As the new queen, she had requested briefings on all ongoing royal initiatives, wanting to understand and support her stepchildren's work. When the Agriculture Ministry delivered their confidential assessment, Isabella realized she was holding a potential scandal that could destroy Elena's reputation and damage the monarchy's credibility. The responsible thing would have been to approach Elena directly, to share the information privately, and work together on a solution. But Isabella knew the palace dynamics well enough to understand that Elena would never accept help from her stepmother. Elena was polite, but distant, professional, but cold. She made it clear through 1,000 small gestures that Isabella was an outsider who had married into the family, but would never truly belong. Isabella picked up a silver-framed photograph from her desk, one of the few personal items she had placed in the formal office. It showed her with King Leopold on their wedding day, both of them smiling genuinely despite the media circus surrounding their relationship. Leopold looked happy in a way he hadn't in years following his first wife's death. Isabella treasured that happiness, but she also understood how fragile it was. The palace staff had been watching her every move for 6 months, waiting for her to make mistakes. The media analyzed her every outfit, every speech, every public appearance. Critics called her too young, too ambitious, a social climber who had seduced a grieving widower. Elena and Marcus were always respectful in public, but Isabella sensed their underlying skepticism about her motives and her qualifications. Today's decision to exclude Elena from the council meeting was desperate and risky, but Isabella saw no alternative. If Elena presented her agricultural initiative as planned, the palace would be committed to a policy that was doomed to fail. When the failures became public knowledge in 6 months or a year, the blame would fall not just on Elena, but on the entire royal family's judgment and competence. Isabella's assistant, Marie, knocked and entered the office. "Your Majesty, the council meeting has concluded. King Leopold would like to speak with you immediately." Isabella's stomach tightened. She had hoped to have more time to prepare for this conversation, but Leopold was clearly upset about Elena's exclusion. "Of course. Is he in his study?" "Yes, ma'am." "And Your Majesty?" He seemed quite concerned about the morning's events. Isabella nodded and straightened her shoulders. She had married into this family knowing there would be challenges, knowing that she would need to prove herself worthy of their trust and the crown's responsibilities. Today would be a test of whether she could navigate royal politics while protecting both Elena's interests and the monarchy's reputation. King Leopold was standing by the window when Isabella entered his study, his posture tense with barely controlled anger. He didn't turn around when she entered. "Leopold, I can explain about this morning." "I sincerely hope so, because right now I'm struggling to understand how my daughter could be turned away from a family meeting on your orders." Isabella closed the door behind her and moved to the seating area, hoping he would join her for a less confrontational conversation. "Please sit with me. This is complicated, and I need you to understand the full situation." Leopold finally turned around, and Isabella could see the conflict in his eyes. He loved her, but his loyalty to his children was absolute and non-negotiable. "Isabella, Elena has been working on this agricultural project for months. She's put her heart into it, and she's genuinely expert in this area. To exclude her from the very meeting where she was supposed to present her findings, it's cruel and it's wrong. I know how it looks, but I had reasons. Serious reasons that involve protecting Elena, not harming her." Leopold's expression softened slightly, but he remained standing. Then, explain those reasons to me. Isabella opened the confidential folder and handed him the Agriculture Ministry's assessment. These documents arrived 2 days ago. Elena doesn't know about them yet because the ministry was waiting for today's meeting to present their concerns. As Leopold read through the environmental impact studies and economic projections, his expression grew increasingly troubled. Isabella watched him process the information, seeing the moment when he understood the implications. This says the water contamination risks are significant, and the economic benefits are overstated by at least 40%. The pilot programs in 3 neighboring kingdoms have already shown problems. Crop yields are down, farmers are reporting increased costs, and there are early signs of environmental damage. If we proceed with Elena's plan as she's designed it, we'll be setting her up for a very public failure. Leopold set the documents down and, finally, took a seat across from Isabella. But excluding her from the meeting wasn't the solution. She should have been informed about these problems so she could address them. And how do you think she would have reacted to receiving that information from me? Isabella's voice carried a note of frustration. Elena barely tolerates my presence at family functions. She's never accepted my role in this family or my right to have opinions about royal policy. If I had approached her with criticism of her pet project, even constructive criticism backed by solid data, she would have seen it as an attack from an illegitimate stepmother trying to undermine her work. Leopold was quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could see him weighing her words against his knowledge of his daughter's personality. You may be right about her initial reaction, he admitted, but Elena is reasonable. Once she saw the data, she would have understood the need for revisions. Would she have assumed I was manipulating the information to sabotage her project? Remember, Leopold, I'm still an outsider here. Elena has never trusted me, and I don't think she ever will. Isabella stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where Elena had often played as a child. I know I handled this poorly. I panicked when I saw these documents, and I made a decision based on protecting her reputation rather than respecting her autonomy. But I genuinely believed that letting her present a flawed proposal would cause more damage in the long run. So you had her turned away at the door like some unwelcome visitor? The pain in Leopold's voice was unmistakable. Isabella realized she had not only hurt Elena, but had put Leopold in an impossible position between his wife and his daughter. I instructed my staff to inform her that the meeting was postponed. I thought I could buy time to figure out a better way to handle the situation. I didn't anticipate that she would contact Marcus or that you would discover the deception so quickly. Leopold rubbed his temples, a gesture Isabella recognized as his way of processing stress. Isabella, I understand your motives, and I appreciate that you were trying to protect Elena, but the execution was terrible. You've made her feel excluded and unwelcome in her own family, and you've put me in the position of having to choose between supporting my wife and defending my daughter. I know. I'm sorry. I should have found another way. The question now is, how do we fix this without making it worse? Isabella returned to her seat, grateful that Leopold was thinking in terms of solutions rather than just consequences. Elena is at the Heritage Library. She's probably researching royal protocol and trying to understand what happened today. That sounds like Elena. She always researches before she acts. I think we need to be completely transparent with her. Show her these documents, explain my concerns, and acknowledge that I handled this badly. But we also need to find a way to salvage her agricultural project. Maybe we can work together to address the problems the ministry identified. Leopold looked at her with something that might have been admiration. You're willing to collaborate with someone who's going to be very angry with you? Elena's expertise is real, Leopold. The problems with her current proposal don't invalidate her knowledge or her commitment. If we can combine her understanding of agricultural issues with these new environmental and economic concerns, we might actually develop a better policy. And if she refuses to work with you? Isabella had been dreading this question because she didn't have a good answer. Elena's trust, once broken, might be impossible to repair. Then I'll have to live with the consequences of my decisions today. But I hope she'll be willing to put the kingdom's interests ahead of her personal feelings about me. Leopold stood up and moved toward the door. I'm going to call Elena and ask her to come back for a private meeting with both of us. She deserves a full explanation, and she deserves an apology. Leopold, what if this damages our marriage? What if Elena convinces you that I'm not trustworthy? He paused at the door and turned back to look at her. Isabella, I love you, and I believe you acted with good intentions today. But Elena is my daughter, and she's a valuable member of this family's leadership team. We need to find a way for all of us to work together, or this kingdom and this family will suffer for it. As Leopold left to make his phone call, Isabella remained in the study, surrounded by the weight of royal history and the uncertainty of her own future in this family. She had tried to protect Elena and the monarchy, but her methods had created new problems that might prove even more damaging than the ones she had tried to prevent. Outside the window, the palace gardens bloomed with late spring flowers, beautiful and carefully tended. Isabella wondered if relationships could be cultivated with the same patience and skill, or if some damage, once done, could never be fully repaired. Elena sat in the Heritage Library's main reading room, surrounded by thick volumes of constitutional law and royal protocol. The afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting geometric patterns across the mahogany tables where she had spread out her research materials. For 3 hours, she had been searching for precedents, for explanations, for anything that might help her understand what had happened at the palace that morning. The historical records were both illuminating and frustrating. Royal families had always struggled with succession politics, step-parent relationships, and competing claims to influence. Elena found dozens of examples from other kingdoms where second wives had maneuvered to diminish the children from first marriages. She also found examples where stepmothers had been unfairly blamed for family tensions that had deeper roots. Her phone had been buzzing intermittently with messages from her brother Marcus, from palace staff, and from friends who had heard rumors about the morning's events. Elena had ignored most of them, but when her father's name appeared on the screen, she answered immediately. Elena, I need you to come back to the palace. Isabella, and I want to explain what happened this morning. Elena closed the constitutional law textbook she had been reading and leaned back in her chair. Father, I'm not sure I'm ready for that conversation yet. I understand, but there are things you need to know about your agricultural project. Important things that affect how we should proceed. Something in his tone made Elena sit up straighter. What kind of things? Information that arrived from the Ministry of Agriculture just 2 days ago. Problems with the environmental impact studies and economic projections that we need to address before moving forward. Elena felt her stomach drop. Months of work, months of research and planning, and there were problems she didn't even know about? What kind of problems? Serious ones. Elena, I think Isabella was wrong to handle things the way she did this morning, but her concerns about the project may have been valid. We need to review everything together. Elena's mind raced. If there were genuine problems with her project, problems significant enough to warrant excluding her from the meeting, then everything she thought she understood about the morning's events might be wrong. Father, give me an hour to finish here, and then I'll come to the palace. But I want a full explanation of everything. You'll have it. Elena, whatever else has happened today, your expertise and your dedication to this project are not in question. We need to find a way to solve these problems, not abandon the work you've done. After hanging up, Elena stared at the books, and documents spread across her table. Constitutional law and protocol questions suddenly seemed less relevant than practical concerns about environmental impact and economic sustainability. If there were real problems with her agricultural initiative, her priority had to be understanding and addressing those problems, not nursing wounded pride about being excluded from a meeting. She gathered her materials and walked to the library's policy research section, where more recent government reports were housed. If the Ministry of Agriculture had concerns about environmental and economic impacts, there might be related studies or comparative analyses that could help her understand the scope of the problems. Captain Rodriguez appeared at her side as she moved between the stacks. "Your Royal Highness, shall I prepare the car for your return to the palace?" "Yes, Captain. But first, help me find everything this library has on agricultural policy implementation, environmental impact assessments, and economic development in rural areas. I need to understand what I might have missed in my original research." For the next hour, Elena and Captain Rodriguez pulled reports, studies, and policy analyses from the library's government document section. Elena skimmed through comparative studies from neighboring kingdoms, looking for patterns or warning signs she might have overlooked. What she found was both reassuring and troubling. Her basic approach was sound, supported by successful implementations in several other countries. But she also found examples of similar projects that had failed due to inadequate environmental protections or overly optimistic economic assumptions. The difference between success and failure seemed to depend heavily on specific implementation details and local conditions. Elena realized that her research had been comprehensive, but perhaps not sufficiently critical. She had focused on best-case scenarios and successful examples, giving less attention to potential problems or failure modes. It was the kind of oversight that could happen to anyone, but it was exactly the sort of thing that could destroy public confidence if it became a scandal. As they drove back to Ravencrest Palace, Elena felt a complex mixture of emotions. She was still angry about being excluded from the meeting, still hurt by the lack of direct communication, but she was also beginning to understand that the situation might be more complicated than simple family politics. The afternoon shift of palace guards greeted her with their usual courtesy, and there were no unusual security arrangements or blocked entrances. Elena walked through the familiar corridors toward her father's study, noting that several staff members offered particularly respectful greetings. Word of the morning's events had clearly spread throughout the palace, and people were being especially careful to show her proper deference. Elena knocked on the study door and entered to find both her father and Isabella waiting for her. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but not hostile, more like a business meeting than a family confrontation. "Elena, thank you for coming back," King Leopold said, standing to embrace her. "Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss." Isabella remained seated, her posture formal and her expression carefully composed. She looked more nervous than Elena had ever seen her, which was somehow reassuring. If Isabella was nervous, it suggested she understood the seriousness of what she had done. "Before we discuss anything else," Elena said, "I want to understand exactly what happened this morning. Who gave the orders to exclude me from the meeting? And why was I told the meeting was postponed when it clearly wasn't?" Isabella took a deep breath. "I gave those orders. I instructed my security staff to inform you that the meeting was postponed because I was afraid that proceeding with your agricultural presentation would be damaging to both you and the monarchy." Elena appreciated the direct answer, even though it confirmed her suspicions about Isabella's role. "And you didn't think to discuss these concerns with me directly?" "I should have. I was wrong to handle it the way I did, and I apologize for that. But I was also concerned that you wouldn't be receptive to criticism of your project, especially coming from me." Elena was about to respond defensively when her father placed a folder on the table between them. "Elena, before we discuss the methods, you need to see the information that prompted Isabella's concerns." Elena opened the folder and began reading the Ministry of Agriculture's assessment. As she worked through the environmental impact studies and economic projections, her anger about the morning's events gradually gave way to dismay about her project's problems. The water table contamination risks were real and significant. The economic benefits she had calculated were overstated by 30 to 40%. Most troubling, 3 pilot programs in neighboring kingdoms had already shown early signs of failure, with decreased crop yields and increased costs for farmers. "How long have you known about these problems?" Elena asked, looking at her father. "I learned about them this afternoon when Isabella showed me the documents. They arrived at the palace 2 days ago." Elena turned to Isabella. "And you've known for 2 days?" "Yes." I requested briefings on all ongoing royal initiatives when I became queen. The Agriculture Ministry delivered this assessment as part of their briefing materials. Elena set the documents down and leaned back in her chair. The scope of the problems was larger than she had feared, but they weren't necessarily insurmountable. Environmental protections could be strengthened, economic projections could be recalibrated, and implementation strategies could be revised based on lessons learned from the failed pilot programs. These are serious problems, Elena said, but they don't mean the entire project is worthless. With modifications, we could address most of these concerns. Isabella nodded. That's exactly what I hoped you would say. Your expertise in agricultural policy is real, Elena. The problems with the current proposal don't invalidate your knowledge or your approach. Elena studied her stepmother's face, trying to read her motivations and intentions. Isabella seemed genuinely concerned about the project's success, not just interested in undermining Elena's work. If you believe the project could be salvaged, why didn't you approach me directly instead of excluding me from a meeting? Isabella's careful composure finally cracked slightly. Because I was afraid you would see any criticism from me as an attack rather than an attempt to help. Elena, you've never hidden your feelings about my presence in this family. You're always polite, but you've never accepted me as anything more than your father's wife. Elena felt a stab of guilt at the accuracy of this assessment. She had been polite to Isabella, but she had also been deliberately distant, maintaining formal courtesy while avoiding any real relationship. That may be true, Elena admitted, but it doesn't justify excluding me from family meetings or lying to me about scheduling. You're absolutely right. I handled this badly, and I'm sorry for that. But, Elena, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to undermine your work or diminish your role in this family. I'm trying to figure out how to be useful without overstepping boundaries that I don't fully understand. King Leopold had been listening to this exchange with growing relief. The conversation was difficult, but both women were engaging honestly rather than simply defending their positions. The question now, he said, is how do we move forward? Elena, are you willing to work with Isabella to revise your agricultural proposal based on these new concerns? Elena considered the question carefully. Working with Isabella would require setting aside her personal reservations and focusing on policy objectives. It would also mean acknowledging that her stepmother had legitimate insights to offer, despite her poor handling of the morning's events. I'm willing to work with anyone who can help develop better policies for this kingdom, Elena said. But I need assurance that future collaborations will involve honest communication, not secret maneuvering. Isabella nodded. You have that assurance. Elena, I made a mistake today by trying to protect you without involving you. If we work together going forward, it will be as equal partners with shared objectives. Elena looked at her father, who was watching both women with cautious optimism. She thought about the failed pilot programs in neighboring kingdoms, the farmers who would be affected by whatever policies they developed, and the kingdom's long-term agricultural sustainability. All right, Elena said. Let's work together to fix this project. But, Isabella, if you ever exclude me from family meetings again, I'll consider it a hostile act and respond accordingly. Isabella smiled for the first time since Elena had entered the room. Understood. And, Elena, if I ever have concerns about your projects again, I'll bring them directly to you, regardless of how uncomfortable that conversation might be. King Leopold stood up, clearly relieved that the immediate crisis had been resolved. Excellent. I suggest you both take a few days to review all the materials thoroughly, and then we'll schedule a new council meeting to present a revised proposal. As Elena gathered the folder of documents, she realized that the day's events had changed more than just her agricultural project. Her relationship with Isabella would never be the same, and that might actually be an improvement. Working together as equals would be more challenging than maintaining polite distance, but it might also be more productive for the kingdom and more honest for their family. Walking back through the palace corridors, Elena reflected on how much had changed in a single day. She had lost a naive confidence in her original project, but she had gained a more realistic understanding of policy implementation challenges. She had been hurt by Isabella's actions, but she had also learned something about her stepmother's motivations and concerns. Most importantly, Elena realized that royal service required more than just expertise and good intentions. It required the ability to navigate complex relationships, to collaborate with people who might have different approaches, and to recover from setbacks without losing sight of larger objectives. Tomorrow, she and Isabella would begin the difficult work of revising the agricultural initiative. It would be a test of whether two very different women could find common ground in their shared commitment to serving the kingdom well. 3 days after the confrontation in King Leopold's study, Elena arrived at Queen Isabella's office for their first working session on the revised agricultural proposal. She carried a leather briefcase filled with research materials, revised economic models, and detailed notes from her conversations with agricultural experts across the kingdom. The office itself surprised Elena. She had expected something formal and intimidating, but Isabella had arranged the space more like a collaborative workspace than a throne room. A large table was covered with maps, policy documents, and environmental studies. 2 comfortable chairs faced each other, with additional space for spreading out materials. Isabella looked up from a thick report she was reviewing. "Elena, thank you for coming. I've been studying the comparative analyses from other kingdoms, and I think I'm beginning to understand the patterns that separate successful programs from failed ones." Elena set down her briefcase and surveyed the materials Isabella had assembled. Environmental impact studies, economic development reports, agricultural sustainability research, and detailed case studies from 6 different countries were organized into neat piles across the table. "You've been busy," Elena said, impressed despite herself. "This is more comprehensive research than I expected. I want to be prepared for our collaboration. I may not have your expertise in agricultural policy, but I can contribute thorough analysis and fresh perspectives." Elena pulled out her own materials and found space for them on the table. "I've been working on revised economic projections based on the ministry's concerns. The original numbers were optimistic, but not impossibly so if we modify the implementation timeline and adjust our assumptions about adoption rates." For the next 2 hours, the 2 women worked through the technical details of policy revision. Isabella proved to be a careful analyst, asking probing questions about implementation challenges and potential unintended consequences. Elena found herself explaining not just what she proposed to do, but why each element was necessary and how the pieces fit together into a coherent strategy. "The water table contamination issue is the most serious problem," Elena said, pointing to the environmental impact study. "But I think we can address it with stronger protection protocols and mandatory monitoring systems." Isabella nodded, then pulled out a report Elena hadn't seen before. "I requested additional information from the Environmental Protection Agency. They've developed new monitoring technologies that could be integrated into agricultural development programs. The costs are higher than we originally budgeted, but the protection levels are significantly better." Elena studied the EPA report with growing excitement. The monitoring technologies were sophisticated and effective, and they addressed exactly the concerns raised in the ministry's assessment. These could work. The costs are substantial, but if we phase an implementation over 3 years instead of 18 months, the budget impact becomes manageable. That's what I was thinking. We sacrifice some of the immediate political benefits of a quick rollout, but we gain much better long-term sustainability and public confidence. Elena looked up from the report to find Isabella watching her with an expression of cautious optimism. "Isabella, this is excellent work. Where did you learn to analyze policy implementation this thoroughly?" Isabella smiled slightly. "I have a master's degree in public administration from Cambridge. Before I met your father, I worked for 3 years at the International Development Bank, focusing on rural economic development projects." Elena felt a moment of embarrassment at her own assumptions. She had always thought of Isabella as a society figure who had married into the royal family, not as someone with serious professional qualifications. I didn't know about your background in development work. I haven't talked about it much since becoming queen. There are already enough critics questioning my qualifications and motivations. I thought emphasizing my professional background might make me seem calculating or ambitious. Elena set down the EPA report and looked directly at her stepmother. Isabella, you should never hide professional competence to make other people more comfortable. Your experience with rural development projects is exactly what this initiative needs. Thank you. Elena, I hope you understand that my concerns about your original proposal weren't about undermining your work. I genuinely want this project to succeed, both for the kingdom's benefit and because I know how much it means to you. Elena nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand that her initial assumptions about Isabella's motivations had been both uncharitable and inaccurate. I owe you an apology, Elena said. I've been polite to you since you married my father, but I haven't been fair. I made assumptions about who you were and what you wanted without ever really trying to get to know you. Isabella was quiet for a moment, arranging some papers with unnecessary precision. Elena, I understand why you were cautious about accepting me. Your father was still grieving your mother when we met, and I was much younger than he was. The situation was complicated, and I probably would have reacted the same way in your position. That doesn't make it right. You've been part of this family for 6 months, and I've treated you like a temporary guest rather than my father's wife and my stepmother. Well, we're talking honestly now, which is progress. Elena smiled at this pragmatic assessment. Yes, we are. And I have to admit, working with you on policy analysis is much more interesting than making polite conversation at family dinners. They returned to their work, but the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The careful formality was replaced by something more natural, more collaborative. Elena found herself explaining her thinking more freely, and Isabella offered suggestions without the hesitant qualifier she had been using. What about farmer education programs? Isabella asked, studying a section of Elena's implementation timeline. The pilot programs that failed seemed to struggle with adoption rates. Farmers understood the theoretical benefits, but had trouble with practical implementation. Elena leaned over to look at the section Isabella was reviewing. That's a good point. I included training programs in the original proposal, but maybe not enough emphasis. Agricultural technique changes require significant behavior modification. The International Development Bank had some interesting research on adult education approaches for agricultural improvement. Would it be helpful if I reached out to my former colleagues for their insights? Absolutely. Elena paused, realizing she had automatically accepted Isabella's offer to contribute external expertise. A week ago, she would have insisted on handling all research herself. Isabella seemed to notice the same thing. You know, Elena, I think we might actually work well together on policy development. Our backgrounds complement each other nicely. I think you might be right. My agricultural expertise, combined with your experience in rural development implementation, could produce better policies than either of us could develop individually. They worked for another hour, revising timelines, adjusting budget allocations, and incorporating the new environmental protection protocols. As the afternoon progressed, Elena found herself genuinely enjoying the collaboration. Isabella asked intelligent questions, offered useful suggestions, and demonstrated a thorough understanding of policy implementation challenges. I think we're making real progress, Elena said, reviewing the revised proposal outline they had developed. This version addresses the ministry's concerns while maintaining the core objectives of the original project. And it's actually more ambitious in some ways, Isabella added. The environmental protections are stronger, the farmer education component is more comprehensive, and the economic projections are more realistic but still substantial. Elena began gathering her materials, but she was reluctant to end the session. The work was productive, but more than that, she was beginning to understand Isabella as a person rather than just as her father's new wife. Isabella, can I ask you something personal? Of course. What made you decide to marry my father? I mean, beyond the obvious fact that you love him. You had your own career, your own life. Royal families are complicated, and you had to know there would be challenges. Isabella considered the question seriously. I did know there would be challenges, and I'll admit I underestimated some of them. But, Elena, your father is a remarkable man who is carrying enormous responsibilities while dealing with personal grief. I wanted to support him, and I thought I could contribute something valuable to the kingdom's work. And has it been what you expected? In some ways, yes. In others, no. The media attention was more intense than I anticipated, and the palace politics are more complex than anything I encountered in international development work. But the opportunity to contribute to real policy work, to help develop programs that affect people's lives, that's been more rewarding than I hoped. Elena smiled. That's exactly how I feel about royal service. The politics and protocol can be frustrating, but the actual work of governance is fascinating. Maybe that's something we have in common, then. We both care more about effective policy than about appearance or status. Elena looked around Isabella's office, taking in the maps and reports and policy studies. I think that might be exactly what we have in common. As Elena prepared to leave, Isabella walked her to the door. Elena, thank you for giving me a chance to prove myself as a collaborator rather than an obstacle. I know I made a terrible first impression with how I handled Monday morning. You made a mistake, but your intentions were good. And, Isabella, thank you for teaching me not to make assumptions about people based on superficial impressions. Walking back to her own office, Elena reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. Her agricultural project was stronger than it had been in its original form, but more importantly, her relationship with Isabella had evolved from polite tolerance to genuine respect and collaboration. Elena realized that she had been so focused on protecting her own role and authority within the family that she had failed to recognize Isabella's potential contributions. Royal service was complex enough to benefit from multiple perspectives and diverse expertise. Rather than seeing Isabella as competition for her father's attention or a threat to her own position, Elena could recognize her as a valuable ally in the work of governance. The revised agricultural proposal would be better policy because of their collaboration, but Elena suspected this was just the beginning. Working with Isabella had shown her the value of intellectual partnership, honest communication, and shared commitment to public service. Tomorrow, they would continue their work, combining Elena's agricultural expertise with Isabella's implementation experience to develop programs that could genuinely improve farmers' lives and strengthen the kingdom's economic foundation. It was exactly the kind of work Elena had always wanted to do, and she was beginning to understand that having a competent partner might make her more effective, not less important. For the first time since her father's remarriage, Elena felt genuinely optimistic about the future of their family's collaborative work in service to the kingdom. 2 months later, Princess Elena stood before the Royal Agricultural Council, presenting the revised sustainability initiative that she and Queen Isabella had developed together. The council chamber was filled with farmers, government officials, environmental experts, and members of the royal family, all gathered to hear the final proposal that had emerged from weeks of intensive collaboration. The Enhanced Agricultural Sustainability Program represents a fundamental shift in our approach to rural development, Elena said, gesturing to the detailed charts and maps displayed around the room. Rather than focusing solely on immediate economic gains, we've designed a comprehensive system that balances productivity, environmental protection, and long-term farmer prosperity. In the front row, Isabella listened with visible pride as Elena explained the program's sophisticated monitoring systems, the phased implementation timeline, and the innovative farmer education components that addressed every concern raised in the ministry's original assessment. King Leopold watched both women with satisfaction. The past 2 months had transformed not only Elena's agricultural project, but also the dynamics of their family's collaborative work. The partnership between his daughter and his wife had produced policy initiatives that were more thoughtful, more comprehensive, and more likely to succeed than anything either woman could have developed alone. The environmental protection protocols incorporate cutting-edge monitoring technology, Elena continued, ensuring that we can detect and address potential problems before they become serious threats to water resources or soil quality. The cost of these systems is significant, but our 3-year implementation timeline makes them financially manageable while maximizing their protective benefits. Minister Davidson from the Agriculture Department nodded approvingly. 2 months ago, he had been the bearer of bad news about Elena's original proposal. Today, he was witnessing the presentation of a policy framework that addressed every concern his ministry had raised while maintaining ambitious goals for agricultural improvement. Your Royal Highness, Minister Davidson said during the question period, how confident are you that this revised approach will avoid the problems encountered by pilot programs in neighboring kingdoms? Elena smiled and looked toward Isabella. Minister, I'll let Queen Isabella address that question, since she led our comparative analysis of international implementation strategies. Isabella stood gracefully and moved to the presentation area. Minister Davidson, our research identified 3 key factors that determine success or failure in similar programs. First, environmental monitoring must be proactive rather than reactive. Second, farmer education must be comprehensive and culturally sensitive. Third, economic projections must be conservative enough to account for normal variations in agricultural markets. She gestured to a detailed comparison chart that showed failed programs alongside successful ones. Our Enhanced Agricultural Sustainability Program incorporates lessons learned from both successful implementations and instructive failures. We're confident that our approach addresses the systemic problems that caused difficulties in other kingdoms. Elena watched Isabella's presentation with admiration. Her stepmother had mastered the technical details of agricultural policy while bringing her own expertise in rural development to bear on implementation challenges. The result was a more sophisticated and realistic approach than Elena's original proposal. Furthermore, Isabella continued, our partnership with the Environmental Protection Agency ensures that monitoring protocols will be updated as new technologies become available. This program is designed to evolve and improve over time rather than remaining static. After the presentation concluded and the council members filed out with their copies of the detailed implementation plan, Elena and Isabella remained in the chamber with King Leopold. That was exceptional work, King Leopold said, embracing both women. The council's response was overwhelmingly positive, and I think we can expect broad support for implementation. Elena began gathering the presentation materials. Father, I have to admit that this program is significantly better than what I would have developed on my own. Isabella's experience with international development proved invaluable, and Elena's agricultural expertise gave the program credibility and practical focus that I couldn't have provided, Isabella added. We make a good team. Elena looked around the council chamber, where she had hoped to present her original proposal 2 months ago. Being excluded from that meeting had been painful and frustrating, but it had also led to collaborations and insights that improved both the policy and her understanding of effective governance. Isabella, I need to thank you for something. Your decision to exclude me from the meeting back in March was wrong in terms of process, but it may have been right in terms of outcomes. If I had presented the original proposal, we would have committed the kingdom to a flawed program. Isabella shook her head. Elena, the original proposal wasn't flawed. It was just incomplete. Your agricultural expertise was sound. The problems arose from implementation and environmental considerations that required different expertise to address. Which brings up an interesting point about royal service, King Leopold said. Effective governance requires diverse expertise and collaborative approaches. Neither of you could have developed this program alone, but together you've created something genuinely innovative. Elena nodded dojehashfully. Father, I think that's the most important lesson I've learned from this experience. I used to think that royal service meant being individually competent and personally responsible for policy areas. But complex problems require team solutions, and effective teams require honest communication, even when those conversations are difficult, Isabella added. If I had approached you directly 2 months ago instead of trying to protect you from bad news, we could have avoided the whole crisis. Elena smiled. And if I had been more open to collaboration from the beginning, you might have felt comfortable approaching me directly. King Leopold watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. The relationship between Elena and Isabella had evolved from polite tolerance through crisis and conflict to genuine partnership. More importantly, their collaboration was producing better governance for the kingdom. I had a proposal for both of you, King Leopold said. The success of this agricultural project suggests that your collaborative approach might be valuable for other policy areas. Would you be interested in working together on the Rural Healthcare Initiative and the Educational Technology Program? Elena and Isabella looked at each other with obvious interest. Their partnership on agricultural policy had been intellectually stimulating and professionally rewarding. Extending their collaboration to other areas would allow them to develop broader expertise while maintaining their individual specializations. I think that could be very productive, Elena said. Rural healthcare connects directly to agricultural policy in terms of supporting farming communities, and Isabella's international development experience includes healthcare delivery systems. And educational technology affects both rural and urban communities, Isabella added. Elena's systematic approach to policy development would be valuable for addressing the implementation challenges. King Leopold smiled. Excellent. I think the kingdom benefits tremendously when royal family members combine their individual expertise through collaborative partnerships. As they walked out of the council chamber together, Elena reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun 2 months ago with her exclusion from a family meeting. What had felt like a personal attack and a professional setback had evolved into a stronger policy proposal and a genuine partnership with her stepmother. Isabella, can I ask you something? Do you think our collaboration has changed how the palace staff and government officials view our family's leadership? Isabella considered the question as they walked through the palace corridors. I think it's demonstrated that we can work together effectively despite our different backgrounds and perspectives. That probably strengthens confidence in the royal family's ability to govern collaboratively. I've noticed that people seem more willing to bring us complex problems that require diverse expertise, Elena said. Instead of trying to figure out whether an issue belongs to the princess or the queen, they present it to both of us. Which is exactly how it should work, King Leopold said. Royal service isn't about individual authority or competing jurisdictions. It's about bringing the best available expertise to bear on the kingdom's challenges. Elena looked at Isabella with gratitude and respect. I think this partnership has made both of us more effective than we were individually. I've learned about implementation strategies and international perspectives, and you've developed expertise in agricultural policy and domestic governance. And we've both learned about collaborative leadership, Isabella added. Elena, working with you has taught me that expertise can't be faked or bypassed. Real competence requires years of study and experience, but it can be shared and enhanced through partnership. As they reached the palace's main hall, Elena realized that the events of the past 2 months had fundamentally changed her understanding of royal service, family relationships, and effective governance. Being excluded from one meeting had led to insights and partnerships that would benefit the kingdom for years to come. Isabella, I'm grateful for your willingness to work through the difficulties we had initially. I know I wasn't easy to collaborate with at first. Elena, you had every right to be cautious about trusting me. I was a newcomer making decisions about your work without consulting you. The fact that you were willing to move beyond that and focus on our shared objectives speaks well of your character and your commitment to public service. King Leopold watched his daughter and wife with deep pride. The royal family's effectiveness as a governing institution had been strengthened by their ability to navigate personal tensions while maintaining focus on public responsibilities. More importantly, Elena and Isabella had both grown as leaders through their challenging but ultimately successful collaboration. I think, King Leopold said as they paused in the main hall beneath portraits of previous kings and Queens, that historians will remember the Enhanced Agricultural Sustainability Program as a model for how royal families can serve their kingdoms through collaborative leadership rather than individual authority. Elena looked up at the portraits of her ancestors, thinking about the lessons they might have learned from political tensions and family conflicts. Father, I hope they'll also remember it as an example of how a parent's setbacks can become opportunities for growth and improvement, and how honest communication and shared commitment to public service can overcome initial misunderstandings, Isabella added. As evening settled over Ravencrest Palace, the three members of the royal family separated to prepare for the following day's responsibilities. Elena would continue developing rural healthcare proposals. Isabella would work on educational technology implementation strategies, and King Leopold would review recommendations from both initiatives. But they would approach their individual responsibilities with the knowledge that collaboration had made them more effective leaders and better servants of the kingdom's long-term interests. The crisis that had begun with exclusion and misunderstanding had evolved into a partnership that strengthened both their family relationships and their governance capabilities. Elena walked to her office with a sense of satisfaction and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but she would face them with confidence in her own expertise and appreciation for the value of collaborative leadership. The lesson of the past 2 months was clear. Effective royal service required both individual competence and the wisdom to recognize when partnership could achieve more than any individual effort.